In this video, I'm going to show you how to add a very strong sense of depth to your renders. So this can make it much more immersive, moody, and just overall interesting for people to look at when they see your artwork. So my name is Max. I'm going to show you here some images that I've made with, I think that I have a very strong sense of depth, so you can just see what I'm talking about. And basically throughout this video, I'm just going to show you 3 of the easiest ways, or most important ways, that you can add a very strong sense of depth to your renders to make them better. So the first thing is volumetrics. So this basically adds separation and a bit of depth automatically by making distant objects that are further away appear hazier. And this will just automatically add a sense of depth because farther away things will just become more, they'll look literally like they're more in the distance. So the way I do this is just add a cube over the whole scene. I'll just show you this really here as a live demo really quick. So if I just hide the volume in this case, I'll just do this very fast. Here's what the scene looks like from the outside. It's a complete mess from the outside, but from the inside it looks like this. And what I'll do is just add a cube over the entire thing. So I'll just add a cube, scale this way up, just cover the general area that this is, that the scene is in. So as long as you can't really see where it ends roughly from the camera view, that's usually what you want. And then what I'll do is just set this cube to display as bounds, so it's out of the way. So you can do that in here in the object properties underneath viewport display, and then display as, just change that over to bounds. As a side note too, you can actually right click this and assign a shortcut to that, so it's really quick to do it like this. Okay, and then for the shader here, I'll just go into rendered view so you can see what this looks like. Okay, and for the shader of that cube I just added, I'll just hit new. I'll delete the principled shader, and then you can either add a volume scatter node or a principled volume node. In this case, they're going to be doing basically the same thing. So I'll just take a volume scatter, and I'll plug that into the volume of that cube that I just added. Now the density is so high right now that it's just pitch black. We want to lower that way down to like 0.001 or something in that range. And then what I'll also usually do is increase this anisotropy slider. This kind of just makes it look more cinematic and cool sometimes by making it more kind of bright, closer to the light sources. So you can see, there we go. And that is my volume setup. Just as a bonus tip as well, if you go into the light path settings over here, and if you increase the number of volume bounces past 0 to 1 or 2, you can't really tell the difference in this case, but this very often makes the volume look a lot more natural and just kind of lets the light bounce around through it a little bit more. So I like increasing that to 1 or 2, just past 0. Any number above 0 is going to have that effect. And yeah, that's how you do volumetrics. Okay, the next thing we can do to increase the sense of depth is have a very clearly defined foreground, midground, and background. So this is very exceptionally clear in landscape photographs, for example. So if we take a look at something like, this, we can see a very clear foreground with these trees up close to the camera, midground with this middle ground landscape right here, like this chunk right here that I'm circling, and then of course the background with either, you can consider just the sky or the mountains here plus the sky. There isn't really, it doesn't have to be a hard cutoff point like you might see in a landscape photo, but it's just very, very clear in these kinds of photos where there's always foreground, which is closest to the camera, midground, and then background. So the midground is just between the foreground and the background, but if you can separate it out into those major 3 components of having a very clear section that is the foreground, a very clear section that is the midground, and then a very clear section that is behind that as the background, that is how you're going to get the most depth. So for example, in my work, if we take this one for example, the foreground would be this, of course, this silhouetted rooftop section right here, like all the dark stuff on the roof right there. The midground would probably be just anything in the city, on the actual city, up to like around kind of like this point-ish right here. So here and below is, I would consider that the midground. And then it's not really a clearly defined cutoff like you might see in a landscape photograph, but I would say it generally kind of fades into background from here upwards. And as long as you have those 3 components, they don't have to be like, doesn't have to be a hard line cutoff or anything, but as long as you have those 3 things in the picture, that's going to maximize the sense of depth you get because you can just split it up into layers like that. Okay, so another example here, one I made in a recent video. Very, very clear foreground right here, up close to the camera. So this general area here, foreground. I would even maybe consider like this kind of stuff on the side here, the bridge, like this general area as well, probably part of the foreground. And then if I add another layer to kind of show the mid-ground would probably be like this kind of section right here, and like all this kind of stuff, maybe even this kind of central tower thing here. So all this kind of general area, I would consider that mid-ground. And then above that, the background is probably anything past that point, which would be like, you know, this, if I just kind of draw the general area I'm talking about, like anything past kind of this general area here. So this gray overcast sky, this second tower thing in the background that's almost fully faded out, that is background. And if you just have those three components, foreground, midground, and then behind that background, and just clearly define that in the image by, you know, having intentionally, you know, whether that's intentionally putting objects very up close to the camera, like I've done here, and maybe even putting objects really far away from the camera, and then having something in the middle between those 2 points. That's what I usually do to maximize the amount of range or depth that you get in the image. So the next thing is to use light to help separate objects and maximize depth. So you might think of light as just a necessary thing to have in the render to just be able to see anything at all. And that is true, but we can also use light very intentionally and as a tool to maximize separation between objects and maximize the sense of depth that we get in the image. So for example, in this one, I'm using sort of a darkish background here, and then a very harsh spotlight coming right down onto these mid-ground objects right here. And that's just very, very clearly separating out the mid-ground objects from the background, just based on the way the light is hitting these objects. It's kind of like coming in from the top. It doesn't have to come from the top, but in this case, it's just coming from the top, creating nice highlights here. And it's, you know, in this area, for example, extremely clear separation from this, you know, mid-ground hand object from the darker kind of spacey background. And so, you know, if you can create very clearly defined shapes, so that could mean like harsh lines and strong contrast between objects using basically just the way you point the lights, which I'll actually show you the blend file in a second here. That's a very effective way to create separation between objects. So if we look at the blend file here, you will actually see that this spotlight or couple of spotlights that are coming down here are shining in a very specific area, and I'm intentionally leaving the stuff behind it and in front of it dark, very dark, because that is going to maximize the separation I get from this kind of space background. You can see we're using the volumetric here as well, and yeah, having that kind of just casting in a very intentional area is what's creating that very, very clear separation of these objects. If there was light everywhere, you might not see as much of a distinction between what objects are closer and which objects are farther away, like the things back here or the background itself. And even, I guess, the foreground is kind of separated out into darkness as well. So this is quite an extreme example. You don't have to use this kind of lighting where it's just extreme, you know, spotlight like this. But if you can use light in a way that it clearly defines the shapes of the objects that you're using, and if you can use it to help separate out objects which are at different distances in the image, that's really going to enhance that effect that we're going for here. And you can see in this one as well, we're using a very clear foreground down here up close to the camera, very clear midground, and very clear background of this kind of ethereal spaciness. So yeah, I'm using kind of all the techniques in this image right here, which is nice. Okay, just as a bonus tip, if you have objects which are in front of other objects, covering up whatever's behind them, this is kind of something that happens naturally in 3D art, but you can also do this intentionally. I guess this kind of just adds a very clear idea of what is in front of what. So for example, this dude here standing, he's standing in a way which is covering up a little bit of the, you know, the frog or whatever behind him. And then, you know, just having something right there increases it's just very clear, hey, this guy is in front of this thing and he's standing there, makes it very obvious what's in front of what, and that can help increase the sense of depth as well. Or like, you know, the guy, it doesn't have to always be some guy standing there, but this dude is standing in front of the bus, which is covering up kind of a bit of the building behind it, which is covering up a different building behind that, which is covering up, I think, whatever's in the background. Just layering things in a way that, like, you don't have to be afraid of objects getting in the way of other objects necessarily. If you do that intentionally, that is another way you can increase the sense of depth by just making it very clear what is in front and what is behind. And just as another bonus tip, if you still do not feel like you have enough depth in the image, you can manually brush in like smoky kind of effects in Photoshop. Here's how you do that. You just take the mist pass. So just go to the view layer properties over here, underneath passes, data, include, just check the mist checkbox right here, turn that on. And then in the world settings, you can adjust the start and end distance. And if you want to see exactly what this is doing, just go to the render tab up here, the viewport shading tab, switch the render pass over to mist, and then you can see the exact range that this is covering. And if you just mess with the start and end distance, you'll be able to see kind of where this is covering and where it's not. I have all these settings on by default, and mine's just at 0 to 100 meters by the default setting. That usually works fine. And then when you render this, you can just go into the compositing tab, output the mist right here. You can either run that through the lens distortion if you use that, or just run it straight out and then denoise it if you need to. So you can just drop a denoise node right there if you need to do that, if it comes out noisy. And then just save the image. Just save the mist pass separately, so the same way you would save a render. And then inside Photoshop, you could basically just drop those two things into a new document. With the mist pass, just turn that on, turn the layer on, and then go over to the channels tab. Control click on any of these thumbnails to make a selection based off of the brightness values of this image. So control click on any one of these thumbnails. That'll make a selection based off the brightness of this. And then if you just make a new layer, create a mask with that selection active, and then just fill this with whatever color you want. I'll just go onto this mist pass mask, and I'll select that and just go to image adjustments, curves, and I'll just adjust the range of this, kind of like a color ramp in Blender. And I'll just kind of manually draw this into, or I'll just put this kind of into a range, which I'm happy to like really separate out certain objects from the background. So right there looks kind of cool. Maybe just coming up a little bit past there. And then what I'll do is I'll just apply the mask, and then I'll just create another mask on top of that, and then invert it so that I can brush this effect in wherever I want. Just take a brush, I'll make it just really soft, and then you could just manually go in and brush that effect in there. And then you can do things like do a special like cloud brush or mix in noise however you want. But yeah, that's another way that I'll often add like ground fog in Photoshop. And then if you just set the blending mode over to like screen or lighten, that usually looks a lot better. And you can see this is a really nice way to increase the sense of depth even further. Okay, so that's it. If you found that helpful, go and check out some of my other videos on my channel. And yeah, bye.